I was standing at my kitchen window watching the snow fall when I saw Margaret Hendricks's black Lexus sliding sideways down my private driveway, heading straight for the split-rail fence I had installed just 6 months earlier. The impact sounded like a gunshot echoing through the quiet February afternoon in Boulder, Colorado. 3 sections of my brand new fence splintered into pieces, scattering across the pristine white landscape like broken toothpicks. I threw on my boots and coat, rushing outside into the blinding snowstorm. Margaret was already out of her vehicle, her perfectly styled blonde hair now dusted with snowflakes, her face contorted in that signature expression I had come to know too well since moving to Pinewood Heights 2 years ago. She was the HOA president, a title she wielded like a weapon against anyone who dared paint their mailbox the wrong shade or let their grass grow a quarter-inch too tall. "Your road is a death trap," she screamed at me before I could even ask if she was okay. "You didn't salt this driveway and now look what happened." I stared at her in disbelief. "Margaret, are you hurt? Do you need me to call an ambulance?" "Don't change the subject, James Anderson. This is your fault entirely. I could have been killed." The absurdity of her statement hit me like a second wave of cold air. My driveway was private property, a quarter-mile-long gravel road that led from the main subdivision street to my house, which sat on a 3-acre lot at the edge of the development. I had specifically chosen this property because it offered more privacy than the cookie-cutter homes clustered together in the main neighborhood. The private road was marked clearly with signs at both ends: private property residents and guests only. "Margaret, why were you even on my driveway?" "This is private property." She pulled her designer coat tighter around her body, her pearl necklace catching the gray afternoon light. "I was coming to deliver your HOA violation notice in person. Your holiday lights were still up past January 15th. That's a clear violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our community guidelines. It was February 3rd. My lights had come down on January 20th, less than a week after the deadline, because I had been in Wyoming helping my elderly father recover from hip surgery. I had even emailed the HOA board explaining the situation and providing photographic evidence that the lights were now down. "The lights came down weeks ago. I sent photos." "Not by the deadline," she snapped. "Rules are rules, James. And now, because of your negligence in maintaining this road, I've been in an accident. My car is damaged and I'm experiencing neck pain." I pulled out my phone, careful to keep it protected from the falling snow. "I'm calling the police to file an accident report. They need to document this." Her eyes widened. "That won't be necessary. This is a private matter that can be resolved between us and our insurance companies. You just accused me of negligence. We need an official report." 20 minutes later, Officer Rebecca Torres from the Boulder County Sheriff's Office arrived in her cruiser, lights flashing through the snow. She stepped out carefully, surveying the scene with practiced eyes. I had met Rebecca a few times at community events and knew her to be thorough and fair. "Afternoon, folks. Got a report of a vehicle accident. Everyone okay?" Margaret immediately launched into her version of events, complete with dramatic hand gestures and claims of severe injuries that somehow hadn't prevented her from standing in the cold for 20 minutes arguing with me. Rebecca took notes, her expression neutral. "Madam, can you explain why you were on this private road?" "I'm the HOA president. I have every right to access properties in our community to ensure compliance with our covenants." Rebecca's eyebrow raised slightly. "This road is private property, marked as such. Mr. Anderson's home is technically within the HOA boundaries, but this access road is his private property. Did he give you permission to be here?" "I don't need permission. I'm the HOA president." Actually, you do need permission. Rebecca turned to me. Mr. Anderson, did you give Miss Hendricks permission to use your private road today? No, I didn't. I wasn't even aware she was coming. Rebecca made more notes. She examined the tire tracks, took measurements, and photographed everything from multiple angles. The evidence was clear. Margaret had been driving too fast for conditions on a private road she had no authorization to be on. Miss Hendricks, I'm finding that you were operating your vehicle on private property without permission. The weather conditions show significant snowfall, and there are no posted requirements for Mr. Anderson to maintain this private road to any particular standard. I'm going to note in my report that the accident appears to be the result of driving too fast for conditions and possible trespassing. Margaret's face turned red. Trespassing? How dare you? I'll have your badge for this. Madam, I'm just documenting the facts. You're free to file any complaints through proper channels. Do you need medical assistance? I need justice. This man's negligence nearly killed me. Rebecca finished her report and provided us both with case numbers. After she left, Margaret stood by her damaged Lexus, glaring at me through the continuing snowfall. You haven't heard the last of this, James Anderson. The HOA board will be addressing this matter at our next meeting, and you'll be receiving a lawsuit from my attorney. She called a tow truck and sat in her car until it arrived, shooting daggers at me through her window. I went back inside, standing at that same kitchen window, watching the tow truck carefully extract her Lexus from my ruined fence. The 3 sections would cost me at least $1,500 to replace, and now I was facing threats of legal action for something that was entirely her fault. My phone rang that evening. It was David Morrison, one of my neighbors who lived 4 houses down in the main subdivision. David was a reasonable guy, a civil engineer who had always seemed embarrassed by Margaret's more outrageous HOA enforcement tactics. James, I heard what happened. Margaret's already sent an email to the entire board and half the neighborhood. She's calling an emergency HOA meeting for tomorrow night. What? She can't call an emergency meeting over a private accident on my property. She's claiming it's a safety issue affecting the whole community. She's saying your failure to maintain your private road creates a dangerous precedent and violates some obscure covenant about property maintenance standards. I spent the next day researching HOA law in Colorado. What I found was both encouraging and concerning. Colorado had some of the strongest homeowner protection laws in the country, but HOAs also had significant power if their covenants were properly written and filed. I pulled out my copy of the Pinewood Heights Covenants and Conditions, a document I had read when purchasing the property, but had largely forgotten since. After 3 hours of reading legal jargon, I found what I was looking for. The covenants clearly stated that all property owners were responsible for maintaining their lots and structures to community standards. However, there was a specific exemption for properties with private access roads. Section 18, Paragraph 7 stated, properties with private roads or driveways longer than 500 feet shall maintain such access ways at the owner's discretion, provided they do not create a public nuisance or safety hazard visible from public areas. My road was a 1/4 mile, well over 500 feet, and it certainly wasn't creating a public nuisance. It was barely visible from the subdivision's main streets. The emergency meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a building that Margaret had successfully lobbied to have built 3 years ago using a special assessment that had cost each homeowner an extra $2,000. I arrived to find about 30 people in attendance, more than usually showed up for regular monthly meetings. Margaret stood at the front of the room, her neck now sporting a cervical collar that I strongly suspected was more theatrical than medical. She had a presentation loaded on her laptop, projected onto the screen behind her. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice taking on a martyred tone. "As you know, I was seriously injured yesterday while performing my duties as your HOA president. I was nearly killed because one of our residents refuses to maintain his property to basic safety standards." A photo of her damaged Lexus appeared on the screen, followed by dramatic close-ups of the broken fence. She had conveniently left out any wide shots that would show she had been on my clearly marked private road. "James Anderson has consistently shown disregard for our community standards. His holiday lights remained up past the deadline. His grass has exceeded the maximum height on multiple occasions, and now his refusal to properly maintain his driveway has resulted in property damage and personal injury." I raised my hand. "Margaret, may I respond? The board hasn't opened the floor for comments yet." David Morrison, who sat on the board as treasurer, cleared his throat. "Actually, Margaret, this is technically a special meeting, not a regular board meeting. If we're discussing actions against a specific homeowner, that homeowner has the right to respond under Colorado HOA law." Margaret's jaw tightened, but she nodded curtly. "Fine. Mr. Anderson, you may speak." I stood, holding my copy of the covenants. "First, I want everyone to know that I have documentation that my holiday lights came down on January 20th. I was delayed due to a family medical emergency, which I reported to the board. Second, my grass has never exceeded the 4-inch maximum height. I have weekly lawn service receipts to prove that. And third, the road Margaret crashed on is my private property, clearly marked as such. According to Section 18, Paragraph 7 of our covenants, I have full discretion over how I maintain that private road." I projected the relevant covenant section on my phone and held it up. Several people in the audience were now looking uncomfortable, and I could see some of them pulling out their own phones to verify what I was saying. Margaret's face flushed. "That section applies to maintenance standards, not safety requirements. Your failure to salt that road created a dangerous condition. A dangerous condition on my private property that you were on without permission. The police report clearly states you were driving too fast for conditions. I was performing my HOA duties, which don't give you the right to trespass on private property. Would you claim HOA duties gave you the right to enter someone's house without permission?" The murmuring in the room grew louder. Sarah Chen, another board member who worked as a real estate attorney, stood up. "Margaret, I think we need to table this discussion. This appears to be a private legal matter between you and Mr. Anderson, not an HOA issue." "It absolutely is an HOA issue. We need to pass a resolution requiring all property owners to maintain their driveways to winter safety standards. We can't mandate maintenance standards on private roads that are already exempted in our covenants," Sarah said firmly. "And we certainly can't make retroactive rules to support what appears to be a personal dispute." The meeting devolved into chaos, with Margaret insisting she had the authority to call for a vote and Sarah arguing that such a vote would be legally meaningless. Eventually, the meeting was adjourned with no action taken, but Margaret's parting words sent a chill through me. "You'll be hearing from my attorney, Mr. Anderson. I'm suing you for medical expenses, property damage, and emotional distress." 3 weeks later, I was served with legal papers. Margaret was suing me for $50,000, claiming negligence, failure to maintain safe conditions, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The complaint was 20 pages of legal accusations, each one more ridiculous than the last. She claimed I had deliberately refused to salt my road knowing she would be visiting. She claimed the unsalted road had caused her permanent neck injury. She even claimed I had installed the fence in a deliberately dangerous location. I immediately contacted Thomas Wright, an attorney recommended by my father who specialized in property disputes. Thomas was in his 50s, with gray hair and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen everything twice. We met in his office in downtown Boulder, my stack of documents and photos spread across his conference table. "This is one of the more creative lawsuits I've seen," Thomas said after reviewing everything, "but it's not without risks. Colorado juries can be unpredictable, especially if she plays up the injury angle. But she was trespassing on my property. Trespassing doesn't always absolve property owners of liability. There's a legal concept called premises liability that can sometimes apply even to trespassers. However, in your case, I think we have very strong defenses. The road is clearly marked as private. You had no notice of her arrival. The weather conditions were severe enough that any reasonable person would drive carefully. And most importantly, the police report supports your version of events. What about her claims of permanent injury? We'll demand her complete medical records. If she's exaggerating, it'll show. We'll also depose her, which means questioning her under oath. People who lie about injuries often trip themselves up in depositions. The legal process moved slowly. Discovery dragged on for months, with both sides exchanging documents and written questions. I provided maintenance records for my property, photos showing my fence was in a completely normal location, and weather reports documenting that the snowstorm had been the worst Boulder had seen in 5 years. Meanwhile, Margaret ramped up her HOA enforcement against me. I received violation notices for everything imaginable. My mailbox was supposedly 2 inches too far to the left. My front door wreath was not an approved color. My outdoor light fixture cast glare that allegedly disturbed neighbors, even though the nearest house was 300 feet away. Each violation came with threats of fines and liens against my property. I attended every HOA meeting, challenging each violation. David Morrison and Sarah Chen increasingly sided with me, clearly frustrated with Margaret's vindictive behavior. Other homeowners began coming forward with their own stories of Margaret's overreach. She had fined one family for having a basketball hoop in their driveway. She had threatened another with legal action for planting flowers that were not on the approved species list. In June, 4 months after the accident, we finally had Margaret's deposition. Thomas and I sat in a conference room across from Margaret and her attorney, Gerald Whitmore, a personal injury lawyer with billboards all over the metro area promising maximum compensation for your pain. Thomas started with basic questions, establishing the timeline of events. Margaret stuck to her story. She had been carefully driving to my house to deliver an HOA notice when she encountered my negligently maintained road. "Miss Hendricks, had you contacted Mr. Anderson to let him know you were coming?" "No. HOA presidents don't need to make appointments to inspect properties." "But you weren't inspecting the property. You were delivering a notice about holiday lights that had already been removed." "I was also conducting a general compliance check." "Did you conduct compliance checks of other properties that day?" She hesitated. "No, the weather was too severe." "So the weather was too severe to check other properties, but you felt safe driving to Mr. Anderson's property." "I had important HOA business with Mr. Anderson specifically." Thomas pulled out a document. "I have the email Mr. Anderson sent to the HOA board on January 16th, with photos proving his lights were down. You received that email, correct?" "Yes." "So why did you need to deliver a violation notice for lights that were already removed?" "He didn't take them down by the deadline." The deadline was January 15th. He was helping his injured father in Wyoming. He notified the board and provided documentation. Why did you feel the need to personally confront him about this nearly 3 weeks after he had already resolved the issue? Margaret's attorney objected, claiming the question was argumentative, but the point was made. Thomas moved on to the accident itself. How fast were you driving when you lost control? I don't know, maybe 20 miles per hour. The police report estimates based on your skid marks that you were traveling approximately 35 miles per hour. That's impossible. I'm a careful driver. The speed limit on private driveways in Boulder County is 15 miles per hour in good weather. Even if you were going 20, as you claim, you were exceeding a safe speed. His road was covered in ice. Yes, during one of the worst snowstorms in 5 years. Can you explain why you chose to drive on a private road during such conditions? The deposition continued for 4 hours. Thomas methodically dismantled every aspect of Margaret's case. He got her to admit she had never asked permission to use my road. He got her to admit she couldn't identify any specific law or covenant requiring me to salt private property. He got her to admit she had sent me multiple violation notices in the months since the accident, far more than any other homeowner had received. Then came the medical evidence. Thomas had hired a private investigator, a decision that proved invaluable. The investigator had videotaped Margaret shopping at Target 3 weeks after the accident, carrying heavy bags and turning her neck freely to look at items on shelves. The video showed her loading cases of water into her car trunk without any apparent difficulty. She had gone to a yoga class 2 months after the accident, performing poses that would be impossible with the severe neck injury she claimed. When Thomas played the videos during the deposition, Margaret's face went pale. Her attorney, Gerald Whitmore, looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Miss Hendricks, you claimed in your medical reports that you suffered a herniated disc requiring ongoing treatment. You stated you couldn't lift more than 5 pounds or turn your head more than 30 degrees. Can you explain these videos? I was having a good day. You're shown carrying at least 30 pounds of groceries. You turn your head nearly 90 degrees multiple times. That's not a good day with a herniated disc. That's someone who isn't seriously injured. Her attorney called for a break. When they returned, the dynamic had shifted entirely. Gerald Whitmore suggested we discuss settlement. We're not settling, Thomas said firmly. Your client committed fraud. She exaggerated her injuries, filed a frivolous lawsuit, and has been harassing my client through bogus HOA violations. We're going to trial, and then we're countersuing for malicious prosecution and abuse of process. I watched Margaret's expression cycle through anger, fear, and something that might have been panic. Her attorney whispered urgently in her ear, but she shook her head stubbornly. The trial was set for October, 8 months after the accident. Thomas filed our countersuit, seeking damages for the cost of my fence, my legal fees, and compensation for the harassment through false HOA violations. We had declarations from 6 other homeowners documenting Margaret's pattern of retaliatory enforcement. In August, 2 months before trial, something unexpected happened. Sarah Chen called me at home, her voice urgent. James, you need to come to tomorrow's HOA meeting. Several of us have been going through the HOA finances and we've found some serious irregularities. What kind of irregularities? The kind that might involve embezzlement. Margaret has been writing checks to companies that don't seem to exist. There's over $40,000 missing from our reserve fund. The next evening's HOA meeting was packed. David Morrison, as treasurer, presented his findings. Over the past 3 years, Margaret had written checks to various companies for services like landscaping, snow removal, and maintenance. The problem was that these companies had no business licenses, no online presence, and no record with the Colorado Secretary of State. The checks had all been deposited into a single bank account. David had done some digging. The account belonged to a company called Pinewood Management Services. The company's registered agent was Margaret's husband, Richard Hendricks. "This is completely inappropriate," Margaret said, standing up. "How dare you investigate me without authorization?" "We had authorization," Sarah Chen said coldly. 3 board members voted to audit the finances after noticing discrepancies in the quarterly reports. As treasurer, David had every right and obligation to investigate. Pinewood Management Services provides legitimate services to this community. Really? Because I drove around and talked to the actual landscaping crews who work here. They're paid by Green Valley Landscaping, not Pinewood Management Services. Same with the snow removal company. None of them have ever heard of Pinewood Management Services. The room erupted. Homeowners demanded answers. Someone called for Margaret's immediate resignation. Someone else suggested calling the police. Margaret tried to regain control, her voice rising to a shout. "This is a witch hunt. You're all conspiring with James Anderson to destroy me because I expect accountability. The only accountability we want is for the $43,000 missing from our reserve fund," David said. "Money we all paid through our HOA dues and special assessments." The board voted unanimously to remove Margaret as president, with only Margaret voting against. They also voted to turn their findings over to the Boulder County District Attorney's Office for investigation. I sat in the back of the room, watching Margaret's empire crumble. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part felt something closer to pity. She had built her identity around controlling this HOA, and now she was watching it all fall apart. 2 weeks later, Margaret's attorney filed a motion to dismiss her lawsuit against me. Thomas immediately objected, arguing that we wanted our day in court and our countersuit heard. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Alvarez, denied the dismissal motion. "Ms. Hendricks filed this lawsuit making serious allegations," Judge Alvarez said during the hearing. "Mr. Anderson has the right to clear his name and pursue his counterclaims. We'll proceed to trial as scheduled." The trial lasted 3 days. Margaret's attorney presented her as a dedicated community servant injured while performing her duties. He showed photos of her damaged Lexus and medical bills totaling $12,000. He called an expert witness who testified about the dangers of unsalted roads. Then Thomas took over. He walked the jury through every piece of evidence. The police report showing Margaret was speeding on private property without permission. The covenant provisions exempting my private road from HOA maintenance standards. The videos showing Margaret's miraculous recovery when she thought no one was watching. The pattern of retaliatory HOA violations. And finally, the criminal investigation into her embezzlement of HOA funds. Margaret's attorney objected strenuously to the embezzlement evidence, arguing it was irrelevant to the accident case. Judge Alvarez allowed it, ruling that it went to Margaret's credibility and possible motive for the lawsuit. If Ms. Hendricks was concerned about Mr. Anderson exposing problems with the HOA finances, that would be relevant to whether this lawsuit was filed in good faith, the judge explained. The timeline supported this theory. I had been one of the few homeowners who consistently challenged Margaret at HOA meetings and questioned the budget reports. 2 other homeowners who had asked questions about finances had also received increased violation notices in the months before the embezzlement was discovered. I testified on the second day, walking through the events calmly. I explained about helping my father in Wyoming. I described watching Margaret's car slide into my fence. I talked about the constant violation notices and the feeling of being targeted for standing up to her. Did you ever refuse to salt your private road because you wanted Miss Hendricks to crash? Margaret's attorney asked during cross-examination. I never salted my private road because I'm not required to, I replied. I drive on it carefully, especially in bad weather. The morning of the accident, I hadn't left my house yet because the conditions were so dangerous. I couldn't believe Margaret was out driving at all, let alone on my driveway without asking permission. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and delivered their verdict. They found in my favor on all counts. They rejected Margaret's claims entirely and awarded me $23,000 on my counterclaims, including the cost of my fence, legal fees, and damages for harassment. Margaret sat frozen as the verdict was read. Her husband, Richard, put his arm around her, but she shrugged it off. They left the courtroom without speaking to anyone. 2 months later, in December, almost a year after the accident, the criminal case concluded. Margaret and Richard Hendricks pleaded guilty to theft and forgery charges related to the embezzlement. They were ordered to repay the full $43,000 to the HOA, plus interest and penalties. Margaret received 6 months in county jail followed by probation. Richard received probation and community service. The HOA held a special election for a new board. David Morrison became president, with Sarah Chen as vice president. One of their first acts was to review all the violation notices Margaret had issued in her final year. They rescinded about 60% of them, finding they were either bogus or disproportionately harsh. They also passed a new rule, one I suggested. HOA board members were prohibited from entering private property without explicit permission from the owner. Violation of this rule was grounds for immediate removal from the board. I used my judgment money to replace my fence and upgrade it slightly. I installed a nice gate at the entrance to my private road with a clearer "No Trespassing" sign. I also installed a security camera system that covered my entire driveway. I wasn't taking any chances. The following February, exactly 1 year after the accident, we got another major snowstorm. I was standing at that same kitchen window, watching the snow fall and drinking my coffee. My phone buzzed with a text from David Morrison. Roads are terrible. HOA clubhouse closed today. Everyone stay safe. I smiled, appreciating the common sense approach. I spent the day inside, warm and comfortable, watching old movies and reading a book I had been meaning to finish. My driveway remained unsalted, covered in 6 inches of pristine snow. No one tried to drive on it. No one crashed into my fence. It was gloriously peaceful. That evening, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find my neighbor, Frank Nguyen, standing there with his 2 kids. Frank lived in the main subdivision but had always been friendly during the Margaret drama. "Hey James, sorry to bother you. Our power went out about an hour ago and the kids are getting cold. I called the power company, but they said it might be 6 hours before they can get to us. Any chance we could hang out here until it's fixed? Of course, come on in. I've got hot chocolate and the fireplace going." Frank and his kids, Emily and Marcus, came inside. The children were 9 and 7, full of energy despite the cold. We made popcorn and hot chocolate, and I let them pick a movie. We ended up watching some animated film about talking animals that I had never heard of, but that had them completely engaged. While the kids were absorbed in the movie, Frank and I talked in the kitchen. "I wanted to thank you for what you did," Frank said quietly. "Standing up to Margaret, I mean. A lot of us were too scared. She threatened to fine me $500 once because my son left his bike on the front lawn overnight. A bike. She made our lives miserable. You shouldn't have had to live like that. HOAs are supposed to maintain property values and handle common areas, not act like dictators. The new board is so much better. David actually listens to people. Sarah helped me get approval for a deck I want to build next summer. It's like we're living in a different neighborhood. Frank's power came back on around 9 o'clock, and they headed home with profuse thanks. After they left, I cleaned up the popcorn kernels and put away the hot chocolate mugs. I walked through my house, appreciating the space and privacy I had fought so hard to protect. The legal battle with Margaret had cost me time, money, and stress. But it had also taught me something valuable about standing up for yourself when someone tries to abuse whatever small amount of power they have. Margaret had used the HOA as her personal fiefdom, and when someone finally challenged her, the whole corrupt structure collapsed. I never saw Margaret again after the trial. I heard through neighborhood gossip that she and Richard moved away after she completed her jail sentence. They sold their house in a hurry, taking a loss to get out quickly. The new owners were a young couple with a baby, nice people who seemed relieved to discover the HOA was now run by reasonable humans. My fence still stands, stronger than before. The split-rail design fits perfectly with the Colorado landscape, rustic, but well-maintained. Sometimes I stand at that kitchen window and look at it, remembering the sound of Margaret's Lexus crashing through the original sections. It seems like something from another lifetime now. The HOA still operates, but it's become what it was always supposed to be. A group of neighbors working together to maintain common areas and preserve property values through reasonable rules, reasonably enforced. David Morrison runs meetings efficiently. Sarah Chen handles legal reviews to keep us compliant with Colorado law, and the neighborhood feels like a community rather than a prison camp. I learned that my 3-acre lot and private road were actually grandfathered into the HOA when the development was built. The original landowner had sold most of his property to the developer, but kept this parcel for himself, building my house in the late 1990s. He agreed to join the HOA for the benefits of trash service and snow removal on the main roads, but he negotiated protections for his private access road. Those protections were right there in Section 18, Paragraph 7 of the covenants, waiting for someone to actually read them. The irony was that Margaret had probably never read the covenants carefully. She just assumed that, as HOA president, she had unlimited authority over everything within the development boundaries. It was a costly assumption. Spring came, and with it, the annual HOA meeting. This one was different from previous years. People actually wanted to attend. There was no tension, no fear of being called out for phantom violations. David presented the annual budget, which was transparent and reasonable. Sarah explained some new Colorado HOA laws that required additional disclosures. We voted on a proposal to resurface the community pool deck, which passed easily. At the end of the meeting, David made an announcement. Before we adjourn, I want to publicly thank James Anderson. A lot of you know what happened last year. James stood up to abuse of power when many of us were too intimidated to act. His courage led to reforms that have made Pinewood Heights a better place to live. So thank you, James. The room applauded. I felt my face flush with embarrassment, but also with pride. I hadn't set out to be a hero or a reformer. I had just refused to be bullied and had stood up for my rights. But sometimes that's all it takes to change things. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to talk to me. Some thanked me personally. Others shared their own Margaret stories, laughing about them now that she was gone. One elderly woman, Patricia Freeman, grabbed my hand with surprising strength. She tried to fine me for having a bird feeder, Patricia said it attracted vermin. I've had that feeder for 20 years, since before this HOA even existed. But I was too old and tired to fight. Now I've put up 3 more feeders. The cardinals are beautiful this year. These conversations reminded me why the fight had been worth it. It wasn't just about my fence or my private road. It was about the principle that people shouldn't have to live under arbitrary tyranny, even the small-scale tyranny of an out-of-control HOA president. Summer arrived with Colorado's typical sudden shift from snow to sun. I spent weekends improving my property, planting trees along my private road and building a small patio behind the house. Every project I planned, I checked the covenants first, not because I was worried about the new board, but because I wanted to make sure I was complying with reasonable rules. In July, I received a letter from the HOA. My heart jumped for a moment, a Pavlovian response from the Margaret years. But this letter was different. David Morrison was writing to inform me that the HOA had received full restitution from Margaret and Richard, plus the judgment amount that Margaret owed me. A check was enclosed. The letter continued. The board has voted to use a portion of the recovered funds to create a homeowner rights fund. Any resident who believes they've been unfairly fined or cited can apply for assistance, including legal support if needed. We never want to see abuse of power in this community again. I endorsed the check and deposited it. The money was nice, but more valuable was the knowledge that the community had learned from what happened. They had taken a bad situation and built safeguards to prevent it from happening again. In August, I got a phone call from Thomas Wright, my attorney. "James, I wanted to let you know that Margaret Hendricks filed for bankruptcy last month. She's trying to discharge the debt she owes you. Can she do that? Debts arising from fraud typically can't be discharged in bankruptcy. I've filed an objection on your behalf. Given the jury verdict and the criminal conviction, I'm confident the bankruptcy court will rule in your favor." He was right. In September, the bankruptcy judge ruled that Margaret's debt to me was non-dischargeable because it arose from willful and malicious conduct. It was a final punctuation mark on the whole saga. That fall, the neighborhood held its first ever community block party. This was David Morrison's idea, a way to bring residents together in a positive way instead of the confrontational atmosphere that had defined Margaret's reign. The party was held in the clubhouse parking lot, with grills and picnic tables set up, kids running around playing games and adults actually enjoying each other's company. I brought my famous chili, a recipe my father had taught me. It was a hit, with people coming back for seconds and thirds. I found myself surrounded by neighbors I had barely known, all of us swapping stories and making connections. This was what a community was supposed to feel like. As the sun set and the party began winding down, I helped David and Sarah pack up the leftover supplies. We stood in the parking lot, watching families drift back to their homes, hearing laughter echoing in the twilight. "This is what you fought for," Sarah said to me. "Not just your fence or your road, but this feeling right here, the feeling that we're all on the same side." She was right. That's exactly what I had fought for, even if I hadn't fully realized it at the time. Winter came again, and with it, more snow. I had invested in a small plow attachment for my ATV so I could clear my private road when needed, but I still didn't salt it. I didn't need to. I drove carefully. I paid attention to conditions, and I respected the power of Colorado winter weather on a cold evening in January. Almost 2 years after the accident, I was sitting by my fireplace reading when I heard a knock at my door. I opened it to find David Morrison standing there, looking concerned. "James, I wanted to give you a heads up. Margaret and Richard are at the community meeting tonight." My stomach dropped. I thought they moved away. They did, but they still own a rental property in the development. Technically, they're still members of the HOA and can attend meetings. They showed up about 20 minutes ago. "What do they want?" "I don't know yet, but I thought you'd want to know. You don't have to come, but I wanted you to have the option." I grabbed my coat. "I'm coming." The community clubhouse was tense when I arrived. Margaret and Richard sat in the back row, both looking older and harder than I remembered. Margaret's blonde hair had gone gray. Richard hunched forward in his chair like he wanted to disappear. David called the meeting to order and ran through the standard agenda items. Margaret sat silently through all of it. Then, during the public comment period, she stood up. "I'd like to say something." The room went quiet. Every eye turned toward her. "I know I'm probably the last person most of you want to hear from. I know what I did. I served my time. I paid back the money I stole. But there's something I need to do that I should have done 2 years ago." She turned to look directly at me. "James Anderson, I owe you an apology. I was wrong. About everything. I crashed my car because I was driving recklessly on your private property without permission. I tried to blame you instead of taking responsibility. I lied about my injuries. I filed a bogus lawsuit. I harassed you with fake violations. And I did all of it because I couldn't stand that someone was willing to question me." The room remained silent. I stood up slowly, not sure what to say. Margaret continued, her voice shaking. "I became exactly the kind of person I always hated. I used the tiny bit of power I had to make people's lives miserable. I told myself I was maintaining standards and protecting property values, but really, I was just feeding my own ego. And when you stood up to me, instead of recognizing that I was wrong, I tried to destroy you. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it." She sat down abruptly. Richard put his arm around her, and this time she let him. I stood there for a long moment, aware that everyone was watching me, waiting to see how I would respond. Part of me wanted to tell her that her apology was 2 years too late, that it didn't make up for the stress and expense and fear she had caused me. But another part of me recognized how hard it must have been for her to come here and say this. "I accept your apology, Margaret," I said finally. "What you did was wrong and it cost both of us a lot. But I appreciate you taking responsibility now. That takes courage." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Richard stood up and they left the meeting quietly. After they were gone, the meeting continued, but the energy had shifted. Something had been resolved, some final piece of unfinished business completed. When the meeting adjourned, several people came up to me. "That was gracious of you," Patricia Freeman said. "I don't think I could have accepted her apology so easily." "Neither could I," Frank Nguyen added. "But I'm glad you did. We all need to move forward." I drove home slowly, thinking about Margaret's apology and my acceptance of it. I hadn't planned to forgive her. If someone had asked me yesterday whether I would ever forgive Margaret Hendricks, I probably would have said no. But seeing her there, broken and humbled, I realized that holding on to anger wasn't helping me. It was just weighing me down. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting what happened. It didn't mean the consequences were erased. Margaret had still gone to jail. She had still lost her position and her reputation. She had still paid me back for the damage she caused. But forgiveness meant I could finally let go of the whole mess and truly move forward. Spring came again, my third spring in this house. My trees along the private road were growing well, already providing more privacy. My fence stood strong. My property was exactly the peaceful retreat I had wanted when I bought it. The HOA functioned smoothly under David's leadership, handling necessary business without drama or overreach. I was working in my garden one Saturday morning in May when a car came up my driveway. I tensed for a moment, old reflexes kicking in, but then I saw it was just David Morrison. He had called ahead this time. "Hey James, got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" "The board is looking for someone to fill Sarah's position. She's moving to Denver for a new job. We thought you might be interested." I almost laughed. Me, on the HOA board after everything that happened? Exactly because of everything that happened. You understand better than anyone how important it is to balance rules with reasonableness. You know the covenants inside and out, and people trust you. I thought about it while we walked up to my patio. I grabbed us both bottles of water from the cooler I kept outside. What would the position involve? Architectural Review Committee Chair. You'd review requests from homeowners who want to build or modify structures. It's about 10 hours a month, mostly just reviewing plans and making sure they comply with county code and our covenants. Can I think about it? Of course. No pressure, but I think you'd be great at it. After David left, I sat on my patio looking out at my property. The idea of joining the HOA board felt strange after years of fighting against it. But David was right that the board needed people who understood the importance of fair enforcement. And serving on the Architectural Review Committee would let me help other homeowners navigate the system, making sure they didn't face the kind of arbitrary rejection I might have faced under Margaret. I called David that evening. "I'll do it, but on one condition. We create clear guidelines for the architectural review process so homeowners know exactly what's required. No surprises, no arbitrary decisions. Deal. Welcome to the board, James." The next few months were busy. I worked with David and the remaining board members to create detailed architectural review guidelines. We researched what other successful HOAs did. We held community input sessions. We made sure the guidelines were clear, fair, and actually helpful to homeowners instead of just restrictive. The guidelines we developed became a model. A regional HOA association even asked if they could share our template with other communities. What had started as my fight against one abusive HOA president had evolved into something bigger, a push for reform and reasonableness in how HOAs operated. I served on the board for 3 years. In that time, we approved dozens of architectural requests, from decks to room additions to landscaping projects. We rejected only a handful, and in each case, we provided clear feedback on what needed to change for approval. Homeowners appreciated the transparency and the collaborative approach. During my 3rd year on the board, we got a request for architectural review from the owners of Margaret and Richard's old rental property. They wanted to add a garage. I reviewed the plans carefully, checking them against our guidelines and county codes. Everything was in order. At the board meeting where we approved the request, I thought about how far we had all come. The property that had once been Margaret's base of power was now just another house in the neighborhood, owned by people who had never met her and knew her only as a cautionary tale. After my 3 years on the board, I decided not to run for re-election. I had accomplished what I set out to do, helping create a fair system and proving that HOAs could function without being oppressive. It was time to let someone else take a turn. My last act as a board member was helping to create a homeowner handbook that explained everyone's rights and responsibilities in plain English. We included sections on how to challenge violations, how to request accommodations, and how to propose changes to the covenants. We wanted every homeowner to feel empowered rather than intimidated. The handbook's introduction included this paragraph, which I wrote. An HOA should serve its members, not rule them. Rules exist to maintain property values and create a pleasant community, not to give power to petty tyrants. If you ever feel the HOA is overstepping its authority, speak up. Challenge it. Your community will be better for it. 5 years after the accident, I still live in the same house. My fence has weathered beautifully, the woods silvering in the Colorado sun. My trees are tall now, providing shade and privacy. My private road remains unpaved, unsalted, and perfectly maintained by my own standards. The HOA functions smoothly, almost boringly so. Board meetings are efficient and well attended. Architectural requests are approved routinely. Violations are rare and addressed reasonably. It's everything an HOA should be and so rarely is. I heard through the grapevine that Margaret and Richard moved to Arizona after selling their rental property. I hope they found peace there. I hope Margaret found a way to channel her energy into something positive rather than destructive. I don't think about them often anymore, but when I do, it's without anger. Last winter, we got another major snowstorm. I was standing at my kitchen window, watching the snow fall, when I realized I was standing in exactly the same spot where I had been when I saw Margaret's Lexus sliding toward my fence all those years ago. But this time, the only thing on my driveway was pristine white snow, undisturbed and beautiful. My phone buzzed with a text from David Morrison, who was no longer HOA president but remained a good friend. Crazy storm. Want to come over for chili later? A bunch of neighbors are getting together. I smiled and texted back that I would be there. I put on my boots and coat and went outside to check my fence, walking along its length, running my hand over the sturdy rails. It had protected my property well for 6 years now, and with proper maintenance, it would last for decades more. As I walked back to my house, I thought about everything that had happened. The accident, the lawsuit, the trial, the embezzlement, the reforms, the apology, the healing. It had been a journey I never wanted to take, but I had learned so much from it. I had learned that standing up for yourself matters. I had learned that small acts of courage can inspire others. I had learned that systems can change when people demand better. And I had learned that forgiveness, when it comes, can free you in ways you didn't expect. That evening, I went to David's house with a pot of chili. About 15 neighbors were there, including Frank Nguyen and Patricia Freeman, and several families who had moved to the neighborhood after Margaret left. We ate and talked and laughed, sharing stories about our work, our families, our lives. No one mentioned HOA rules or violations or compliance. We were just neighbors being neighborly. As I drove home that night, carefully navigating the snowy roads, I felt grateful. Grateful for my home, my community, and the hard lessons I had learned. My private road was still unsalted, still exempted under Section 18, Paragraph 7 of the Pinewood Heights Covenants. And Margaret Hendricks was just a memory, a cautionary tale about what happens when small power corrupts and what happens when someone finally says enough. I pulled into my driveway, the headlights illuminating my fence standing strong against the snowstorm. I parked in my garage, walked into my warm house, and stood once more at that kitchen window, looking out at the winter night. Everything was exactly as it should be. The fight had been worth it. The stand I took had mattered, and in the end, justice and common sense had prevailed. That fence still stands today, a reminder that sometimes the things we fight hardest to protect are worth every ounce of effort we put into defending them. Not just the physical structure, but what it represents. Our right to privacy, our right to be free from arbitrary authority, and our right to stand up and say no when someone tries to abuse whatever tiny bit of power they have been given. It is just a fence. 3 sections of split-rail cedar bordering my private road in a subdivision in Boulder, Colorado. But it is also so much more than that. It is a line in the snow that someone tried to cross and failed. It is a symbol of the principle that our homes should be our sanctuaries, not subject to the whims of self-appointed enforcers. And it is a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary objects become extraordinary through the stories they hold and the battles they survive. Every time I look at that fence now, I remember not just the accident and the lawsuit, but everything that came after. The community that came together, the reforms that made people's lives better, the friendships that formed through shared struggle, the growth that came from standing firm when it would have been easier to give in. And every winter, when the snow falls and my private road disappears under a blanket of white, I smile knowing that it remains perfectly maintained by my own standards, exempt under Section 18, Paragraph 7, and completely, thoroughly, and legally unsalted, just as it should be.